So it's a real pleasure to have Sarah. I'm going to get to you, but we go way back. I go way back with Colin Hunter too, but he doesn't know that because I've been reading this guy's stuff forever. I used to write for the Waterloo Region Record, was in communications with one of our venerable institutions here in town at Perimeter. And I guess now working your way into wrestling, Colin, as a referee.
That's right. I wanted to make a movie about the unsung heroes of my favorite, I was going to say guilty pleasure, but now it's just a pleasure. Professional wrestling. I know I need to talk you into that.
A little bit.
But I figured instead of just making a movie about it from a third-person detached perspective, why don't I hop in the ring myself? You know, I'm too old, I think, to actually do the wrestling. I'm learning I may be too old to do the refereeing. It's more demanding than I thought.
I believe that.
Yeah. But I figured I'd help tell the story of these unsung heroes who are in every single match but never get any of the attention. And some of that's by design. They're meant to be these invisible supporting cast members in the drama that unfolds in the ring.
Sarah Giedlinger is with us as well, the Bond Park podcast, and so much more. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
How is it you got yourself wrapped up in this particular project?
I'm not really sure. So Marshall Ward and I run the Bond Park podcast. He's my co-host, and we produce that show together. And he's a wrestling mega fan, and I never got it. I never understood. And I would say Marshall's an historian, like he's an expert on all things wrestling. Mm-hmm. He's quoted in books. Hi, Marshall. I know you're listening. So I talked Marshall into actually starting a wrestling podcast, and the whole shtick of the podcast is called An Unscripted Spectacle. And the whole thing is, I know nothing about wrestling or wrestlers or the whole world, or didn't when we started it, and Marshall knows everything. So, of course, Colin Hunter, being the creator of Kayfabe News, which I'm sure we'll get to, connected us to all of these wonderful guests, writers, wrestlers, promoters, referees, lots of people, managers in the field of wrestling, and they pop up on the screen, and I don't know who they are. I have to sort of say, "Oh, you have a world's best dad mug. You got kids?" And Marshall's laughing because he's been watching these people on TV for decades, right? So through this relationship of starting this podcast, it was sort of a natural progression to geek out a little bit about wrestling, and then Colin pitched this idea about him becoming a referee and that we follow the story.
It's a really interesting story. Can we go back to its roots, though, Colin? Mm-hmm. Where did wrestling first enter your life, and what made it stick like this?
What made it stick? I have no idea. I've tried to shake it. My whole life, my mother for years and years said, "Oh, it's just a phase. He'll grow out of it." Well, here I am, 47, and I'm making a documentary about it. Now I'm becoming a pro wrestling referee. So I think what hooked me about it from a very early age is the magic of it and the illusion of it. Earlier, you called it a sport, and I think that's a misnomer. I don't think it's a sport at all. I think it has much more in common with community theater, improv comedy, than any sort of sport. It looks like mixed martial arts. It looks like fighting, but really it's an elaborate, cooperative, I think, a beautiful performance art.
So I'm glad you said that, because honestly, I chose sport because I didn't want to offend anyone. Like, I like to tease golfers sometimes. It's a game, not a sport. But I think that's a really good description of what wrestling is. It is absolutely theater, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's a blast. You know, the illusion in the ring is that these people are battling and fighting each other. But what I've learned in making this documentary is that it's anything but that. It's not a violent thing at all. If anything, they're doing their best to not hurt one another, put on a great show, but make sure they can do it the next night or the next weekend. So backstage at these wrestling shows, I swear, I don't think there is any other form of entertainment, friendly environment you can imagine, which is such contrast to what happens just on the other room, and the room is feeding back to them. So when you go to a small wrestling event, let's not think about WrestleMania and the giant Superdomes or anything, but you go to an independent wrestling event. They're happening all the time around Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge. You're right up close to the wrestling, and so they can hear your taunts and they taunt back, and it's a form of it's almost like vaudevillian theater where you're encouraged to shout out and be part of the show. Without the audience, there is no show.
Sarah, as you went through this project, I mean, have you become a fan of the wrestling?
So, yes. And I say that reluctantly because I was very resistant. I thought, I'm an observer. I'll make this documentary. This is fun. I'll have the conversations. But it snuck up on me. Through this work, Colin and I share a lot of clips back and forth, and he'll share with me sort of what something current that's happened or something silly from the past. And I think I sent back a message saying, "Oh, this is great. I love it. I've watched 3 times." And I said, "Oh, shoot." And he goes, "It's happening. Don't try and fight it. It's happening." You know?
Became a wrestling fan against your will.
Against my will. And it really was. I had no idea from these indie shows that we go to. It really was the community spirit that got me. You know me. It's all about community and knowing your neighbor and trying to have a good time, you know, just finding the joy wherever you go.
Absolutely.
As much as you can, because you kind of have to, right? And it is toddlers next to grannies, next to, you know, big burly men, next to like a group of ladies, and everyone is booing and clapping and shouting at the same time. And that invitation from the performers for the audience to get involved is so heartwarming. I was immediately hooked. So here I am.
While I don't confess to be a wrestling fan.
Not yet.
Right, not yet. While I'm not yet a wrestling fan, and I'm not yet consuming it regularly, I'm not so dumb as to misunderstand what's going on in that ring and the inherent danger that may be involved. So you, no disrespect, you already mentioned 47. At your age, what has this journey been like for you trying to working your way up the ranks as a referee?
I'll tell you, it's more demanding than I thought it would be. Physically demanding. When you're in the ring, it may look on TV like these wrestlers can bounce around and feel nothing. But boy, those rings are harder than they look. And the referee's getting up and down and running around and pulling wrestlers apart. And so I was absolutely exhausted and beaten down the first number of times I've tried it. I've lost weight. I'm eating better. I'm watching my diet because I know I have to keep up with these athletes. It may not be a sport. It is not a sport, but they are athletes, all of them. And for me to even keep up and play the role that I have to play, I have to sort of move at the same speed that they're moving. Ultimately, I have to stay out of the way. These are big bodies, and I'm not supposed to get in the middle of them until I am, right? So the referee's job is to be essentially invisible and unnoticed until exactly the right moment. So to stay out of the way, but then be exactly where they need to be when the bad guy is breaking the rules or the good guy has got a pin and may win the match.
So can you share some of the, I don't know if rehearsal's the right word, but what goes, like the background before a match so that you know where you're to be, like how this is going to play out?
Well, the background is I went to school. I went to wrestling school, Off the Ropes Studio in Kitchener.
Canada's only female-owned wrestling school.
Canada's only female-owned wrestling school on Lancaster Street. And I told them I want to be a referee and I want to do this project. And the first thing they did was teach me what they teach the wrestlers, which is how to move in the ring, how to roll, how to not break your neck, how not to bang your head. It's very important if you actually want to do this regularly to know how not to injure yourself. So I went to school, they put me through the paces, and then, at the school, we'd run practice matches. So there were trainees, there are classes for kids, classes for women. It's the most friendly environment compared to what you'd think it would be. And we ran practice matches, and I would get critiqued for everything from counting too fast to not asserting myself strongly enough to having my fly down on more than one occasion. You can even see in my very first match I refereed at Elements in Kitchener. The match is over and everything went okay, and the first thing I do is check to make sure my fly is up because I was trying to remember my training.
Did you suffer any sort of injury along the way?
I have not been injured. I have a sore hand sometimes from pounding the mat. But it's really the grind of moving around that ring quickly and getting up and down and making sure that you are really doing the part that you need to do to tell the story. You know, what would a Western movie be without the sheriff, right? I'm the sheriff. There's a bad guy in town. There's a good guy who wants to beat him, but the sheriff is sort of this mediator, the lawmaker, who makes the whole tension work. That's if a bad guy is cheating in a wrestling match, but there's no referee to tell them, stop that, then the casual fan, the first-timer, like a Mike Farwell, doesn't necessarily know, like, oh, that's cheating. Okay, I get it. You're not allowed to do that. You know, you have to kind of tell the story for every new audience as you do it. And it's a lot of improv. They know the basic beats of what's going to happen, but in the ring, they are relying on a lot of training, a lot of practice to put on a show that looks like violence, but ultimately it's a play.
Sarah, what did you learn about this performance art as you went through the project?
Honestly, I'm still learning. So even just hearing Colin talk about the rules and learning what the rules are, and you might not know what's against the rules, et cetera. Even now, still, they'll be counting to 5 in a corner or 20 when somebody's outside the ring. And I'm like, what's happening now again? I mean, I've been filming at the edge of the ring and almost been smooshed by wrestlers before. So I had to learn to move very quickly because they fly off that top rope and onto the ground like it's no thing, you know? And I also learned very quickly. I showed up to the first 2 filming sessions with fancy gear and big ideas. And I realized very quickly that there's just no room for that. You just have to move fast for the camera and stay out of the way and get the best shot you can get. And sometimes it's a little shaky or sometimes it's a little, out of focus, but you're doing the best that you can with the tools that you have in that environment.
Right. It emulates the raw feel
totally.
of these shows.
For sure, right?
It does.
Yeah. It's, the wrestling that we're going to is not in front of 50,000 people. It's in front of a couple hundred. And we did a show at a elementary school. Lackner Woods Elementary School had a fall fair recently. So the ring is surrounded by hundreds of kids and parents, and they don't know who we are. And these are just kids in school. So the performers have to tell the story very quickly to a brand new audience of very excited kids who are hepped up on cotton candy. And it was the most lively, happy crowd we've seen at any wrestling show. And I include big WWE shows in that. I think that what's happening on the local independent level is so much more interactive and more fun because you can just really be immersed in the experience.
So your career, Colin, prior to moving into documentary filmmaking and becoming a referee, documentary filmmaking, still storytelling, which has been your career, either through print media or corporate communications, but also throughout that, you have built what I would describe as a large cult following, if it's fair to call it a cult following, for Kayfabe News, kind of the Onion of the wrestling world. What is Kayfabe News all about?
You actually just nailed it. From the very beginning, I thought if this could be considered the Onion of the wrestling world, that's perfect. That's what I'm going for. It's unabashedly ripping off the Onion style of satirical news headlines. But I use this subculture of wrestling both as sort of the subject matter of the satire and kind of just as the vehicle or the foil for making fun of something else in society. So it has that Onion tone of very straight-faced, deadpan journalism and the illusion that there's a big newsroom of journalists working very hard on these stories, but none of them are true. I've been doing this for 10 years, 3,000 some odd stories I've posted, millions of views, and all of it is made up to be funny. It's this sort of satirical news. So when we announced this documentary, a lot of people were like, wait a second, is this real? Are you actually making a documentary? And I have to assure them, no, this one's real. The other 3,000 things I said, not true.
I cried wolf, but not this time.
Yeah.
That speaks, though, to the audience that there is and the appetite that exists for wrestling.
Yeah, it's huge. It's enormous. And it still continues to be one of the most watched things in the world, professional wrestling. And of course, there's wrestling at its face value, which is a circus of action and shouting and big muscular bodies pounding each other. And then there's below that, I think there's a subculture of fans who understand what it is, understand the showbiz aspect of it, and can appreciate sort of a satirical take on it. It's opened a lot of doors. It opened a door to make a YouTube show where we actually had a broadcast with a newscaster delivering these insane headlines. And what it really did was, doing this for 10 years, the wrestlers out there in the world have gotten to know not me, but Kayfabe News. And so when I reached out and said, hey, I'm the guy who makes Kayfabe News and I'm doing a documentary about wrestling, basically everybody has said yes, because they know that I'm not out to do a story that's a tell-all expose, and I'm not going to do anything that's sort of gotcha. I'm doing a celebration of wrestling from, there's a lot of documentaries about wrestling, but not a one about the referee, despite the referee being in every single match that's ever happened in wrestling. So,
what attracted you to the referee? Just because it's like that underdog, the invisible character in the play?
The unsung hero underdog story. In all of my journalism at the Record, and even when I was doing science communications about theoretical physicists, I'm always looking for the unsung hero, the underdog who's doing something different, something unique that falls outside of sort of the other normal beats and the normal stories. So everybody focuses on the wrestlers, as they're supposed to. They are the stars of the show. But there are supporting actors. You know, there's an Oscar category for the supporting actor. But there's never been a wrestling award, or there's very few. Some of the best referees have been recognized by their peers. One of them is in our movie. Actually, a few of them in our movie. Earl Hebner is one of the most famous referees for the so-called Montreal Screwjob, a famous wrestling happening from many years ago. But ultimately, these are the people who don't ever get the spotlight, which has always been my favorite topic of journalism.
Sarah, for you, this just adds another element to an increasingly broad and, dare I say, eclectic portfolio.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it really does. And it's been a super exciting time to follow. You know, we started this story as though we're following Colin on his journey, but really it's been about the rest of the referees that we've met along the way. Emily Parker, who's a second-generation ref following in her late father's footsteps. Cameron Adamson, who's from Windsor, referees with no legs. Ken Kensington, we call Kinetic Ken, with lots of energy in the ring. And I'd say the longest running Ontario referee, Harry D.
Yep.
Well respected.
The top referee in Canada.
Thank you.
Every wrestler says, if you're going to make a movie about referees, you have to talk to Harry D. And so he's my Obi-Wan Kenobi, teaching me the ins and outs of how to do this. And it's amazing how real it does feel when you're actually in there and doing it. I don't pretend to be enforcing the rules. I'm trying my best to enforce the rules, and I'm getting frustrated when those bad guys, the heels, won't listen to me.
So good. So good. Where, most importantly, are we going to be able to see The Ref Didn't See It?
So we're still in production at the moment, but we're wrapping that up, and everyone can go to therefmovie.com to follow our journey. We'll be launching a Kickstarter in a few weeks.
Therefmovie.com. Fantastic. That's the name of the documentary. The Ref Didn't See It. You can check it out at therefmovie.com. I love the energy and enthusiasm you're bringing to this. I can't wait to see the finished product. And thanks for stopping by and having some fun with us.
Thank you. We're going to get you to a wrestling show very soon.
100%.
December 9th in Kitchener.
Colin Hunter and our good friend Sarah Giedlinger joining us on the Mike Farwell Show, City News 570.